Hi everybody, welcome to this introduction to ArrayLists. ArrayLists allow us to store lists of objects. Those objects could be strings, they could be students, they could be elephants. Anything related to a class that you've designed can be stored in an array list. So primitive data types like integers and booleans can't be stored in an array list unless you're using something called a wrapper class. And perhaps in this course we can investigate that a little bit further. Today we're just going to be looking at how to process an array of objects. And we're going to be working with student objects. We'll keep it very simple. There's just one property and an accessor method here. So I'm going to go into my main program, and today I'm going to design a function called manage_students, which I will call from the main function. Now, of course, I need to design that function. It's just a static function, doesn't return anything, and there are no parameters. Now, what this function does is it allows us to process an array list of student objects and to declare an array list of student objects. This is the Java syntax. Of course, we need to give our list a name, and we can initialize it to be a new array list of student objects, and we need to call the ArrayList constructor method. And that is how to declare and initialize an array list of a certain type of object. Now, purely out of curiosity, let's go to system.out.println students, which is our array list, dot size. So with normal arrays, we use dot length, but with array lists, we use dot size. Okay, so let's see what the size is. The size is 0. We haven't added anything to the array list, so the size is 0. Now, let's create a student. So I'm calling the constructor method of the student class. It expects a string, and it will assign the data to the class variable. And let's take that student and let's add it to the array list of students. So students, which is our array list, dot add S1. We've just added a student to the array list using the add method of the array list class. Now let's run the program again and see what the size is now. The size of this array list is now 1. Okay, so if we were to create, let's do 4 of these students, S2, S3, S4. We've got Jack, Jill, Joe, and Jazz. And we're going to add all of those 4 students to our array list. Okay, so S1, of course, I'm just going to make a note here. S1 was Jack, S2 was Jill, S3 is Joe, and S4 is Jazz. And now let's just look at the size. Hopefully the size is 4. You kind of understand what we're doing, I hope. There we go. Now let's just create another method called display students. And this is going to display all of the students in the list students. Okay, so let's design that method. Again, it's just a static method. Doesn't return anything. It does process an array list of student objects, and I'm just going to call it slist. Doesn't matter what you call it, it's just a parameter. Let's loop through whatever this thing is here. We're going to loop through it. So for int I equals 0 to I is less than slist.size, because it's an array list, I++, system.out.println slist.get I. So in the ArrayList class, the get method will get the object at the specified index, which we're using I to control that. So this will get a student object. Okay. Now if we run that, we're going to see something a bit weird. This is the address where the student at index 0 exists in computer memory. Okay, so slist.getI is a student because slist is an array list of students. So now that we've got our student, let's look at the student class and see if there are any useful methods that we can call. And of course, we have the getName method. Okay, so this is the student object, and this is a student class method that we can use with student objects. Now let's run the program. Brilliant. Okay. Now let's mess around a little bit with how we're adding students to our array list of students here. Joe, I'm going to push into index 0. So at the moment, Jack is at index 0, Jill is at index 1. I'm going to use another version of the add method of the ArrayList class to push Joe to be before Jack. That will push Jack down to index 1, Jill down to index 2, and then we'll add Jazz at the next index, index 3. So let's see the result of that. So Jack went in first, then Jill, but then Joe took Jack's place. Joe took Jack's place, Jack was pushed down, Jill was pushed down, and then Jazz was added. Okay, so there's another option of how to add objects to an array list. Specify the index, and then add the object. Okay. Now let's have another look at another method. Let's not use add this time, let's use set. Set will go to the index that we specify and overwrite anything that's there with the new object. So when we run this code, Jack is added first, then Jill is added, then Joe overwrites Jack. Joe is pushed in at index 0 and overwrites Jack, and then we add Jazz. So we should see Joe, Jill, and Jazz only in this. Joe, Jill, Jazz. We overwrote Jack when we added Joe. So set really means overwrite. Okay, so I'm just going to return that to add. And the final thing we're going to do here is students.remove whatever is at index 2. And let's see what happens. When we add all these students to the array list, Jack is at index 0, Jill is at index 1, Joe is at index 2, and Jazz is at index 3. I'm going to remove Joe because he's at index 2. Jazz's index will become 2. So we'll have Jack at 0, Jill at 1, and Jazz's index will change to 2. So let's run that and see if it works. Jack is at 0, Jill is at 1, and Jazz moved down in the array list to index 2 because Joe was removed. So that is a very brief introduction to array lists in Java. Have a think about it and have a play with the different methods add, index, set, index, and the remove method. Have a go.